Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is intended solely for educational and entertainment purposes. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony from the ongoing case involving Will Smith, as reported by credible sources. What prompted Will Smith's longtime head of security to break his silence after 15 years of loyal service? What did Michael Reynolds witness that was so disturbing it drove him to risk his entire career, and why did Will Smith allegedly instruct him, never speak of what you saw? In a shocking development that has left Hollywood reeling, Michael Reynolds, who served as Will Smith's head of security from 2008 to 2023, has taken the stand in what many are calling the most unexpected testimony of the year. For over a decade and a half, Reynolds was the silent shadow behind one of entertainment's most powerful figures, privy to private moments, family interactions, and the carefully guarded reality behind the celebrity facade. He didn't appear as a friend. He didn't come as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Reynolds arrived as a professional who had reached his ethical limit, carrying with him a detailed journal documenting incidents that directly contradict the carefully crafted public image that millions have come to know and love. "I took an oath to protect," Reynolds stated, his voice steady despite the weight of his decision. "But I never took an oath to conceal wrongdoing or to participate in deception that could harm others. The decision to testify wasn't made impulsively." Reynolds had spent years as part of Smith's inner circle, trusted with the most intimate details of the actor's life, but as Reynolds' testimony began to unfold, the courtroom fell silent, absorbing revelations that paint a dramatically different picture than the charismatic personality millions have welcomed into their homes through television and film. If you're finding this information valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more breaking developments. In this ongoing case, the federal courtroom atmosphere was electric as Michael Reynolds was sworn in. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the deep lines of concern etched around his eyes. Will Smith, seated at the defense table, maintained a composed expression, though his legal team exchanged worried glances as Reynolds approached the stand. Nobody expected this testimony from someone so deeply embedded in Smith's inner circle. The room was tense, eyes focused on the witness stand until Reynolds removed a small black notebook from his suit jacket. Gasps echoed, even the judge froze. No announcement, no prepared statement, just Reynolds opening to a page marked July 2019 with steady hands that betrayed years of professional discipline. Until that moment, Reynolds had maintained unwavering loyalty to his employer. But something had changed. Maybe it was the mounting allegations from others. Maybe it was the growing weight of his own conscience. Maybe it was realizing his silence had enabled behavior that crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries. Whatever it was, Reynolds was done keeping the secrets he had been paid to protect. He wasn't taking the stand as a celebrity associate. He was there as a security professional who had documented a pattern of concerning behavior that directly contradicted Smith's public persona. And when he began to speak, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear, because what Reynolds revealed about the private behavior, the controlled environment, and the systematic effort to maintain a pristine public image wasn't just surprising. It was a carefully documented account that had been concealed from the public for years. It started like any other day of the trial. The room buzzed with low conversations. The press hunched in their designated rows and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for the scheduled expert witness on digital communications. But when the bailiff announced Michael Reynolds, instead the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake, others thought it was a publicity stunt. But the way Reynolds walked deliberately to the stand, his expression resolute and professional, told everyone this was entirely real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Will Smith, who had been reviewing documents with his attorneys, suddenly looked up, his normally expressive face becoming utterly still as recognition dawned. Reynolds took the oath. No eye contact with anyone. He didn't even glance at the defense table where his former employer sat. "I understand the gravity of my presence here today," Reynolds began. "I've spent 15 years maintaining the privacy and security of the Smith family. I've signed numerous NDAs, and I've been compensated well for my discretion." The judge allowed him to continue, and from that moment on, the entire trial shifted, because what Reynolds was about to say wasn't part of any media narrative. It wasn't a social media speculation. It was testimony from someone who had been in the room where it happened. When asked to explain his role, Reynolds described his position as more than simple security. "My official title was head of security, but the reality was much broader. I managed a team of 6 to 12 security personnel depending on the family schedule and public engagements. I coordinated with venue security, managed secure communications, conducted background checks on all staff entering their properties, and essentially controlled the physical boundary between the Smith family and the outside world. The prosecutor approached cautiously. Mr. Reynolds, can you tell us what prompted you to come forward today despite the non-disclosure agreements you mentioned? Reynolds looked directly at the jury. There comes a point where professional obligation must yield to moral obligation. I've witnessed behavior that contradicts not just public perception but basic standards of conduct. I've seen things systematically hidden from the public that I believe are relevant to these proceedings. Smith's legal team immediately objected, arguing that any non-disclosure agreements should prevent this testimony, but the judge, after reviewing relevant documents, ruled that potential misconduct wouldn't be protected by such agreements. I've brought my personal security logs, Reynolds said, holding up the small black notebook. These are contemporaneous notes I kept throughout my employment, standard practice in executive protection to document incidents that might have security implications. I've maintained these records for 15 years, he said. I've had a successful career in executive protection. I've worked with government officials, corporate executives, and other high-profile individuals. I've been trusted with matters of extreme sensitivity, but none of that compares to what I've documented in these pages. He turned slightly toward the courtroom. These aren't just security logs, they're a record of a carefully constructed facade. Reynolds told the courtroom that it started like many professional relationships do, with clear boundaries and expectations. It came through a referral from another security professional. The way they framed it, it was supposed to be standard celebrity protection, managing fan interactions, preventing unauthorized access, ensuring travel safety, normal protective services. I'd been recommended because of my military background and discretion, so I didn't question the extensive NDA requirements. But the moment Reynolds began working closely with Smith, he noticed concerning patterns. The public areas of the properties were meticulously maintained for visitors and staff. All interactions were carefully stage managed. The second I raised concerns about certain behaviors I observed, I was reminded of my confidentiality obligations that should have been the first red flag. They said it was for privacy reasons, to protect the family's personal life. But it felt like something else, like they didn't want certain behaviors getting out. He was gradually given increasing responsibility and access. The work environment became more controlling. There were strict protocols about who could interact with Smith without supervision. It felt like someone was always watching, not just the family but the staff as well. Reynolds said that after approximately 2 years in his position, he witnessed the first truly troubling incident. It happened at a private residence in 2010. Mr. Smith was having what appeared to be a controlled breakdown. He was destroying property, throwing objects, and verbally berating staff members. When he noticed me observing, he immediately switched demeanor, laughed it off as getting into character for a role, and later pulled me aside, saying, "What happens in the house stays in the house. That's what I pay you for." And he smiled. That smile, it wasn't warmth, it was a reminder of who held the power. The courtroom remained silent as Reynolds turned pages in his notebook. I documented numerous instances of similar behavior: dramatic mood swings, excessive control over family members, public statements, and elaborate efforts to maintain his public image. He read directly from an entry dated September 14, 2015. Third incident this month. Subject became enraged when social media team failed to properly filter comments on family Instagram posts through phone against wall. Instructed me to terminate social media manager employment immediately. When I suggested a more formal HR process, was told that's not how we handle problems in my house. Later instructed to have former employees sign additional NDA with increased financial penalties. Reynolds paused, collecting himself professionally. In my professional assessment, what I observed was a pattern of controlling behavior that extended beyond normal privacy concerns. He continued, reading entries that documented a growing disconnect between Smith's public persona and private behavior, instances of staff being required to take blame for his mistakes, and elaborate systems designed to prevent any negative information from reaching the public. The most significant revelation came when Reynolds read from a 2019 entry, witnessed argument between subject and redacted name. Subject made reference to making people disappear from the industry and stated, "One call for me and you'll never work again." When subject noticed my presence, I was later called to his office where he stated, "Don't ever mention what you saw. Nothing leaves this room. That's not just your job, that's your only option if you want to keep working in this town." Reynolds said he followed Smith into a meeting with his publicity team after a particularly concerning incident, thinking they were going to address damage control for a public misstep. Instead, what he heard revealed a systematic approach to image management. There were detailed strategies for suppressing unflattering stories, some involving high-profile journalists, some described as friendly editors. There were others who participated in maintaining the facade through their silence, and Smith was consistently described by his team as the product that needed to be protected at all costs. He paused, maintaining his professional composure. I didn't fully understand the extent of it at first, and that was by design. Information was compartmentalized. Everyone only knew their piece of the operation. Reynolds continued, his voice steady and factual. A few days after witnessing a particularly heated private argument in August 2020, I received a call, blocked number. All the voice said was, loyalty is rewarded, disloyalty has consequences. Which side of that line do you want to be on? Then they hung up. He thought it was just a coincidence until an envelope arrived at his personal residence. It was unmarked. Inside was a detailed dossier about his family members, their daily routines, schools, workplaces. I almost didn't look at all the contents, but I did. It included photos of my children at school taken that week. I don't remember telling anyone where they attended school, but there it was. There was a note attached saying, we protect our own. Make sure you remember what that means. Reynolds testified that the implied threat made him understand the stakes involved. I realized this wasn't just about celebrity privacy. This was about creating an environment where people feared speaking about what they witnessed in their last significant interaction. Smith called Reynolds to his home office after a public event where a reporter had asked an unexpected question. He was reviewing security footage of staff members trying to determine who might have leaked information. When I suggested it might have been simple journalistic research, he said, there are no coincidences in my world. There are no accidents. There are only people who keep their word and people who become examples. The implied threat was clear, he said. That's when the manipulation intensified. I'd get calls from both team members checking my temperature after witnessing incidents. I maintained professional distance. Then suddenly my security team members started being replaced with people I hadn't personally vetted. Longtime staff were let go. Rumors circulated that I was difficult to work with, that I was paranoid, that I was no longer trusted. I knew what it was. It was isolation. Smith didn't need to threaten me directly. He was gradually removing my support system, and so for years Reynolds said nothing. He performed his duties, maintained his professionalism, focused on the security aspects of his role. But every time I witnessed another incident, watched another staff member be berated, then later bought into silence with bonuses or threatened with legal action, I questioned what I was actually protecting. He looked around the courtroom. He didn't just maintain an image, he created an environment where people feared telling the truth, and that, Reynolds said, was what finally brought me to court. Reynolds paused, glanced at the jury, and leaned closer to the mic. It wasn't just the NDAs, those were the official leash. But there was an unofficial one too, he said. From that moment on, everything he did felt like it was being monitored and evaluated. He explained that messages would come through different channels, reminders about team loyalty and family privacy. When he expressed concerns about certain behaviors, things would shift behind the scenes. I'd raise an ethical concern on Monday, and by Friday I'd find my security team had been restructured or my access to certain meetings had been revoked. He said this didn't happen once or twice. It became a pattern. He didn't have to issue direct threats. He had systems that did it for him. His network reached into talent agencies, production companies, even security firms. He knew who to call. He knew how to make professional problems appear out of nowhere and how to make career opportunities disappear just as quickly. Reynolds' voice remained steady and professional. I maintained my position for 15 years. I convinced myself I was just doing my job, but then I was called to testify in this case, and I watched Smith's legal team characterize him as unfailingly professional and respectful of all staff. He said the first time he heard them portray Smith as a model employer who would never engage in threatening behavior. He didn't immediately respond. Then I received the subpoena, not from Smith's team, but from the prosecution. They said, Mr. Reynolds, we have reason to believe you have relevant information about the defendant's pattern of behavior. Other former staff have mentioned your name. He described feeling like his professional world had shifted. I didn't even know my security logs would be relevant, but once I reviewed them in preparation for testimony, everything connected. Reynolds said he spent several days reviewing his years of notes, the documented outbursts, the controlled environment, the systematic management of information. It was all there in professional chronological order, documented as part of my security protocols. This wasn't hearsay. These were contemporaneous notes made in the course of my professional duties. He said the breaking point wasn't fear, it was professional integrity. I realized that if I didn't provide accurate testimony, I would be complicit in perpetuating a false narrative. My professional reputation is built on integrity and discretion. But discretion was never meant to shield misconduct. He told the court he responded to the subpoena immediately. I told them I have contemporaneous security logs covering 15 years. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them truthfully. He looked at the jury. I wasn't just a security professional with notes. I was a witness to years of behavior that directly contradicts what's being claimed in this courtroom. Then he looked at the defense table with professional detachment and the instruction to never mention what you saw is exactly why I'm obligated to speak now. For his final statement, the judge allowed Reynolds to address his testimony's context. He remained seated, maintaining his professional demeanor. You built a career on careful image management, he began. You called it privacy, you called it protection, you called it standard celebrity procedure. But what I observed went well beyond that. The defense team whispered urgently among themselves. Smith sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Reynolds continued with his testimony. I witnessed the gap between public persona and private behavior. I observed the methods used to ensure staff compliance. I documented the systematic approach to preventing information from reaching the public. You maintained control through a combination of financial incentives, implied professional threats, and explicit NDAs. Then Reynolds referenced his security notebook. These logs weren't kept to expose anyone. They were standard security protocol to document potential vulnerabilities or incidents that might have security implications. That's the person. I've always been a professional doing his job thoroughly, Reynolds addressed the jury directly. If you think this is just about celebrity privacy or one person's behavior, you're missing the broader context. This is about systems designed to shield powerful individuals from accountability, and those systems rely on people like me choosing silence over truth. Then he returned his attention to the court as a whole. The instruction to never mention what you saw wasn't about protecting privacy. It was about ensuring that certain behaviors remained hidden from public view. He closed his notebook and sat calmly awaiting further questions. And Smith, he remained composed, his famous charisma momentarily subdued, because for perhaps the first time in his professional life the narrative was no longer under his control. When Reynolds completed his testimony, he didn't look like someone who had achieved victory. He looked like a professional who had performed an unpleasant but necessary duty. The courtroom remained tense, processing the implications of his statements. Even the judge appeared to be carefully considering the testimony's weight. Some of the jurors were taking extensive notes, and the defense team was already preparing for aggressive cross-examination. Reynolds didn't engage with the press. When he exited, he didn't make statements, didn't seek attention. He walked out of the courthouse with the same professional demeanor he had maintained throughout his testimony. When asked later by reporters if he feared professional repercussions, he reportedly responded, integrity in one's professional conduct isn't negotiable, it's fundamental. But outside the courtroom, the entertainment industry was only beginning to process the implications. Studio executives held emergency meetings, publicity teams prepared contingency statements, production companies with ongoing projects began reviewing contractual clauses. Associates who had previously praised Smith's professionalism were now issuing carefully worded statements expressing surprise and concern. Behind closed doors, crisis management teams were activated. Publicists sent internal communications advising clients to avoid commenting until the situation clarified. And while many industry insiders attempted to distance themselves from the revelation, social media was already analyzing years of public appearances with new context. Past interviews were being scrutinized for signs of the behavior Reynolds described. Red carpet interactions where Smith appeared controlling were re-examined, and most significantly, statements from other former staff members who had previously been dismissed as disgruntled employees were gaining new credibility. The public wasn't just surprised, they were processing a complex reaction to learning that someone they had welcomed into their homes through decades of entertainment might be dramatically different behind closed doors, that the funny, charismatic personality they thought they knew might be a carefully constructed image maintained through systematic control and intimidation. The era of unquestioning celebrity admiration was evolving, and as this case continues to develop, we'll bring you the most accurate information available. If you found this report informative, please like and subscribe to our channel, because when the carefully crafted narrative begins to unravel, it's our responsibility to follow the facts wherever they lead.